It's my pleasure, as Bobby's on sabbatical this morning, we're going to have a lot of guest speakers the next 4 Sundays, and Dr. Paula Qualls gets to start us off. So we welcome her this morning, and let me just tell you a little bit about Paula. I hope she doesn't mind me calling her Paula. No. But she's been involved in ministry and higher education for over 20 years. She currently serves as a professor of Hebrew language and Old Testament at Gardner-Webb University. Her passion is mentoring young adults and offering hope in Jesus Christ. She's married to Greg, and they have 3 children. And so, Paula, welcome.
Thank you.
And if her microphone doesn't work exactly right, give us a second. We'll make sure it works. Welcome.
So can you all, yeah, it's working. So my students call me Dr. Qualls, but I want you all to call me Paula. We'll just set that straight. So thank you. Several years ago, Greg and I took a trip to South Carolina. That's where my parents live. And we wanted to see the damage from Hurricane Hugo. And so this was many years ago. And I took Greg into a neighborhood where one of my friends lived. And I said, let's go find their house, see if they're there, and see what kind of damage there was. We couldn't even find their house. We tried to drive down the road to their house, and there was another house that had been lifted up and planted right in the middle of the road. And then we turned around and we saw a Holiday Inn. And the Holiday Inn that used to stand in this place, fully finished and beautiful, looked like someone had chopped off the front of it and taken a giant vacuum cleaner and just sucked everything out. And the swimming pool looked like it was lifted up in the air, broken in pieces, and just sitting there. It was unbelievable. And as I reflected on that for many years, I thought about that. And I thought, this isn't fair. I can't even find my friend's house. And you would have some houses that were perfect and others that were completely demolished. And I think about that and other disasters that come our way, and we realize life isn't fair, is it? Life doesn't always make sense. And it might not be a hurricane. It could be something that we're dealing with day in and day out. And we look at other people and we think they don't have any struggles, which isn't true, by the way. But life isn't always fair. And on a smaller scale, I guarantee you, if you ask some of the younger children in our church how they feel about this week or next week returning back to school, they'll tell you it's not fair. So we can have a hurricane, we can have back to school, and we realize sometimes life just isn't fair. And some of you are going off to college this week. Some of you are letting your children go off to college. There's change around the corner. Life doesn't always seem fair. And I think all of us bring probably some kind of burden with us today. So what I want to speak about today is a psalm, Psalm 37, that addresses some of these concerns that we bring with us today. So when we begin in Psalm 37, the very first verse begins with the phrase, do not fret or do not worry. Your translation might be a little different. And the psalmist is contrasting this different way of living, and I'm going to hold my hand up here because this is the high road. He's contrasting this different way of living to this way of living that he's stuck in right now. Okay, so this is where we don't want to be. This is where the psalmist is challenging us and calling us to live our lives. So let's take a look at this. It begins in verse 1, and I'm going to read verses 1 and 2 from Psalm 37. Do not fret because of evildoers, nor be envious of the workers of iniquity, for they shall soon be cut down like the grass and wither as the green herb. Now, Scott mentioned to you that I teach Hebrew, and I promise I'm going to speak this whole thing in English. I've never spoken or preached in fully Hebrew, but I am going to tell you a little bit about the Hebrew language. And one of the things that I love in the study that I've done in Hebrew is learning what these words mean and expounding on them. It's really deepened my study of the Bible and my walk with the Lord, so I hope to do that for you too. But this word that my Bible translates as do not fret, some translations say do not worry, some translations say do not be agitated. And it's really nice because in this passage, and you do have what I'm looking at is verses 1 through 8. In verse 1, you have this phrase, do not fret. In verse 8, you have this phrase, do not fret. It's even repeated again in verse 7, so it's pretty important. But it's like a sandwich. Verse 1 and verse 8 are like a sandwich. And the important stuff is what's in the middle. And in the middle, you have a string of imperatives or commands. I like to call them invitations To move from this way of living where you're completely stressed out and you're worried to this way of living. It's a different way of living. So this Hebrew word for fret is much stronger than our daily anxiety. You know, you're in traffic and you're feeling a little stressed. That's not what this is talking about. Although this might apply to some of you who are in traffic. It means to be hot, to be furious, to burn with anger, and show rage. So it's anxiety, it's worry, and a whole lot more. And the psalmist is totally enraged over the wicked who are prospering. So that's his concern. The wicked are prospering. And how can I live a righteous life in the midst of this injustice? And so he's going to tell us how. But this psalm doesn't just address that concern. It can speak to any concern or burden that we bring with us today and give us wisdom for that concern. So do not be hot, furious, and burn with anger. Now I'm going to show you a better way. Y'all ready? This is when it gets fun. Here's all these imperatives. And let's think of them as invitations to a different way of living. But they're strong words, they're commands. Here's the first one in verse 3. Therefore, trust in the Lord, do good, dwell in the land, feed on his faithfulness. Now that's a mouthful right there. And I want to break it down a little bit. This word for trust, we know what trust is, right? You can think of, y'all ever done this? Maybe you haven't done it, but you've seen it on TV. Someone lies back, and we're not going to demonstrate. I'm not going to have Greg come up here. But if I did, I would fall back and Greg would catch me, and I know he would. That kind of trust fall. That's what this is talking about here. It's this trust where you put your hope and your faith in someone. It can even mean to throw yourself down on your face before someone or something, to rely, to be confident, secure, and bold. It's a picture of totally letting go, complete abandonment to God. Now, last summer, right about this time, our family went ziplining for the first time. I was scared to death. I'm just hanging on. I was so scared. And one of the guides said to us, if you want to, stand on the platform, kind of like this, but a little bit higher, and face your back towards the zip line and just fall back. And I thought, you got to be kidding me. There's no way I'm going to trust that cable unless I can look at it. And even then I was terrified. But I watched my 20-year-old daughter get on that platform, and she didn't even look back. She just fell into that cable. And I felt my stomach, flip a couple times. She completely put her trust in that cable, which I thought was a little crazy. It really made me sick. But it was a good picture of what this trust is like. And then this summer, we went on vacation and we were on a hike. And I'm not kidding you all, this was kind of amazing because I kept seeing little girls with their fathers. And I thought, I need to write this down. This will make a good sermon illustration. Didn't know I'd be sharing it with you today. But I saw these little girls on this hike, and the first little girl was snuggled up to her dad, and he was holding her like this, and she was asleep. And I thought, wow, she doesn't have any worry about the danger of this hike. Dad's carrying her, and she's sound asleep. She's secure, she's trusting. Then I saw another little girl. She was on her dad's shoulders. You know how you carry your kids on your shoulders. And she's patting on his bald head and laying her cheek on his bald head and getting ready to fall asleep on his shoulders. Totally trusting. Then I saw another little girl, same hike. This little girl was in one of those back carriers, and her arms are hanging out like this, and she's smiling and talking, and she's just enjoying this hike, having a good old time. No worries. Is Dad going to slip? Are we going to fall over the side? And there were lots of dangers. And then the fourth little girl, this one just blew my mind. Fourth little girl I saw at the beach. She was about 1.5 years. The dad was carrying her like a baby. That's a real good picture of trust. And she was sound asleep. And I watched them walk past, and I'm not kidding you, I watched them walk past this sign that read, "Do not swim, sharks sighted." So here's this little baby. They had just gotten out of the water, and she fell asleep. Had no idea that there were 2 pregnant sharks in the bay and the danger that she could have been in if they swam closer. But she was putting her trust in her father. Trusting in the Father. Honestly, I find that kind of trust very difficult to do. For me, it's like walking upstream. You ever try to do that? And the water's coming against you and you're trying just to get your footing and that water's about to push you over. For me, that's what it's like to trust. I think because I try to do it in my own strength. I'm over here and I'm trying to do it my way, and the Lord is calling me this way. Because when we really trust and let go, it's not nearly as difficult. But I find it difficult and I struggle with that. And I hear verses like Isaiah 55:8. My thoughts are not your thoughts. Your ways are not my ways. My ways are higher than your ways. And it challenges me. I'm over here doing it my way and I'm being challenged to come over here. Or I hear Jeremiah 29:11. I know the thoughts that I think toward you, says the Lord. Thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope. Or I read books like Galatians, Ephesians, Colossians, and I'm challenged, calling me out from living in the flesh to living in the Spirit. There has to be a better way than doing it my way. Let's continue with this verse. So y'all will be glad I'm only looking at 8 verses today, because this is pretty meaty. Verse 3, trust in the Lord, do good, do what's right, dwell in the land, stay where you are, do what God has called you to do, and feed on his faithfulness. This is one of my favorite verses in this passage, because this word for feed is a Hebrew word that means to pasture, to graze, and to tend. It's the word that's used when the Hebrew Bible is talking about feeding the sheep or taking care of your cattle. So we are to feed on God's faithfulness like the animals feed on the grass. And some of you who have farmed, you know what a cow does, right? Cow chews its cud. Cow chews on that grass, swallows it. What do they do next? There you go. They spit it back up. They swallow it again. They do this several times, and that's part of how they digest what they're eating. And I think that's a great picture for what we are invited to do here. Feed on God's faithfulness. Read it in the Word. Think about it. Meditate on it. Spit it back up. Look at it again. Digest it a little bit more. Look at it. You get the idea? It's kind of gross, I know, but you get the idea. It's pretty powerful when you think of it that way. Okay, so we're called to feed on his faithfulness. Anybody know what that word is in Hebrew for faithfulness? Hebrew trivia. My students never know these things either. Okay, the Hebrew word is aman. It's where we get the word amen. Guess what it means? And I like to do this: to be fixed, to be firm, to be established. Aman. So we are invited to feed on the fixedness, the firmness, and the stability of God. Like an animal or a cow chews on its cud. So feed on his faithfulness. Y'all get the idea, right? Feeding on his faithfulness. But what do we do instead? I don't think I'm the only one who does this, but I think in the midst of our struggles and our questioning, we feed on anything but God's faithfulness. We feed on worry. We feed on fear. Oh my goodness, I can't find it. I don't know what I'm going to do. They're going to think I'm crazy if I say that. Right? We do that, don't we? We feed on negative thinking, past failures, unforgiveness. Sometimes we feed on the unforgiveness towards ourselves or unforgiveness towards someone else. Sometimes we avoid the issue, seek a diversion, watch TV, hang out with friends. The list can go on and on. And then sometimes we get busy doing things, even in the church. We get so busy doing things that our soul is longing and craving for the presence of the Lord. And we're so busy we don't even know it. We feed on busyness. Someone has said, hurry is not of the devil, it is the devil. If the enemy can keep us engaged in muchness and manyness, he will rest satisfied. If we hope to move beyond the superficialities of our culture, we must be willing to feed on God's faithfulness. We see models of this in our Bible, in the Old Testament. Psalms 106 and 107, read them sometime. Recount God's faithfulness. In Acts chapter 6 and Acts chapter 13, Peter and then Stephen, and then Paul recount God's faithfulness throughout the Old Testament. So we can do that too. If we want to feed on God's faithfulness, make a list of the times God has been faithful. If you can't think of a time when God has been faithful to you, make a list of the times when you've seen God being faithful in someone else's life. And that'll start to boost your faith. And then feed on this. Meditate on it. Think about it. All right, let's move on to verse 4. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart. Doesn't that sound nice? Delight yourself in the Lord. So, of course, I had to look up, what's that word mean in Hebrew? And at first I didn't get much help because it got more complicated. This word for delight means to be soft, delicate, dainty. How in the world do you do that? Spend time in enjoyment. Take exquisite delight in. And when I think of that, I think of drinking a little cup of tea, and you've got your little pinky out. It's all dainty, right? But there's more that comes with that. This word is often associated with God's provision of food, of something to drink, of safety. So delighting in the Lord is the kind of thing that we do when we sit down with friends or family and we have a meal. We share that meal together and we fill our bellies and we tell stories and we laugh. That's a nice picture of what this means to delight in the Lord. And I saw 2 more little girls on this vacation, and they really epitomized what this means to delight ourselves in the Lord. First little girl was on a hike, a different hike. We went hiking a lot. And this little girl was facing her dad, and she was kissing him on his cheeks, making that sound, ma, ma. It was so cute. You remember, Greg and I stopped and just stood there and watched. And the mom was taking pictures, and the dad was laughing. They were delighting in each other. It was really sweet. Second little girl, we were at the beach, and this little girl was running around butt naked, so that got my attention. That's not a common thing, right? She was about 2, and she's running around. She had sand all over her, and her dad took her down into the ocean, and he was washing her off, and then he starts throwing her up in the air. And he throws her up again, and she's laughing, and she's falling down, and he's catching her. And they're looking at each other, and they're laughing and delighting in each other. And the little girl never saw this giant wave that repeatedly was coming, and the dad had his back facing the ocean. And he wasn't afraid. He knew the ocean, he knew himself, and he knew his strength. And every time his daughter was safe. And they had so much fun. They were delighting in each other, delighting in the Father. And then this verse continues, delight yourself in the Lord, enjoy the presence of God, spend time in the presence of God, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Wouldn't it be nice if it was that simple? Wonder what that means. Okay, we understand, if we delight in the Lord, he will give to us what we desire. But that has 2 parts to it. At the very same time, that means that God can place desires in our heart and grant those desires. It blew my mind when I read that, when I was studying this in Hebrew. And we know what it's like. When we grow closer to the Lord, something in here starts to change, right? Things in our heart start to change. And so I think this verse means when we delight in the Lord, he places his desires in our heart and he fulfills those desires. I had someone say to me a couple of weeks ago, pastor at my parents' church, we grew up together, and he said, I just got back from Africa. When I got saved, I wanted to go to Africa. I don't know why, and it took me 50 years to get there. That desire was planted in his heart immediately, and he said, and I'm going back. And I told his wife, you better start praying because you might move there. She didn't like that. But God changes us from the inside. It's a beautiful thing. Verses 5 and 6, commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he shall bring it to pass. He shall bring forth your righteousness as the light, and your justice as the noonday. Another imperative, calling us out from this brooding anger, living in our own flesh, calling us to a different way of living. And here's the exhortation, commit your way to the Lord. What that means in Hebrew, it's really weird. It means roll it off, roll away. Okay, you ever see kids, or maybe you did this when you were a kid, roll down a hill? My kids would be so excited when they would see a hill when they were little. We can roll! And they'd roll down the hill. Okay, that's what this word means. So roll your way off onto the Lord. That's kind of weird, isn't it? Wonder why they translated it as commit. And so I was thinking about this, and sometimes the Hebrew language communicates with pictures. Sometimes there aren't even any verbs. You'll just have a picture here and a picture here, and you understand it. Sort of like sign language. And so the picture that I began to see or understand this verb to help me understand it was, if you could do this with me just in your mind, picture yourself standing at the edge of a cliff and there's a huge boulder. And if you were capable of pushing that off and rolling that off, that's what I think we have here. Roll it off onto the Lord. What happens if you were able to roll a giant boulder off of a cliff? What would happen to that boulder? Simple, I promise you. Simple physics here. It's going to fall, right? And when it gets to the bottom, it's going to break. Maybe in a million pieces, maybe in a few pieces. But you're not going to be able to get it back up that hillside or up that cliff. It's gone. It's finished. And I think that's the idea here, which is why it's been translated as commit. Roll it off onto the Lord. Roll it off completely onto the Lord. And your way is your path, your life, your decisions, your concerns. So think about this. Just hear this expanded for you. Roll your way, your life, your path, your problems, your struggles, your fear, your worry off onto the Lord. Roll off onto the Lord your control, your plans, your failures, your schedules, your family, your friends. Roll off onto the Lord your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your spouse, your future, your need to be right, your need to have all the answers. Do you see how this list can go on and on? And if you picture yourself rolling that boulder off and truly letting it go, we never take it back again. But our problem is we nudge it a little and then we pull it back. And we push it a little and then we pull it back. It's so hard to completely let go. But when we truly commit, we roll it off and we never take it back again. And verse 6 then tells us, God brings forth our righteousness. God then justifies us. God makes it right, whatever it is. When we give it to him, then he's free to do his work. Because we get in the way sometimes. I'm learning that right now. I have 2 young adults. I have a 20-year-old and an 18, almost 19-year-old. It's a hard stage of parenting. I thought the bottles and all that stuff was hard. It is. It's a different kind of hard. This one's more letting go. And it's so difficult because as a mother and a father, your natural instinct is to scoop them up and carry them. So I'm living this out every single day, and it's a challenge. But when I get out of the way and I let go, I'm watching God work. And it's incredible. Okay, last 2 verses, 7 and 8. These are really fun. Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret. There's that word again. Do not fret. Do not brood with anger over him who prospers in his way. So the call then is rest in the Lord and wait patiently. But I want to unpack that a little bit. Some of your translations might say, be still in the Lord. The Hebrew word means to grow dumb. Doesn't mean that you become unintelligent. It means that you are silenced, still, stupefied, dumbfounded. I like the word awestruck. You're awestruck. You're speechless. You don't know what to say before the Lord. Now, if we've never experienced that, then hear this as a call to you, a call to a different way of living, because the psalmist is telling us that we can have this experience with the Lord. There's something different, a deeper walk with the Lord that maybe we've never experienced. Be dumbfounded and awestruck in the presence of the Lord and wait patiently for him. Now, I picture that as just sitting with my hands folded, batting my eyes, and waiting patiently, which I'm not very good at. It's much stronger in Hebrew. This word for wait patiently means to labor, to writhe, to dance, to wrestle, to struggle. Got to give you a few more. I forgot some of them. It means an active waiting, to anguish, to wait longingly. It's often associated with childbirth. Now, we don't have to have a show of hands, but ladies, if you have birthed a child, were you just sitting there waiting patiently? Baby's going to be here soon. You were laboring. And there is an element of patience because the baby's not born instantly. And you labor. Physically, you labor and you wait and you long, and it's difficult. That's what this word means. Rest in the Lord. Be awestruck by the presence of the Lord and labor over him. I love that. I love that so much because I understand what it means to wrestle and struggle. I live with that every single day. And we see models of this in the Old Testament. Laboring over the Lord in the midst of difficult situations. I think sometimes in church we've been taught you're not supposed to question God. Anybody ever been taught that? Maybe? Okay. But the biblical example really shows us something different. We see people questioning and wrestling with God, questioning to know more, to move from here, to this spirit-led life. And we see some good examples of that in the Old Testament. We see the prophet Habakkuk. He wrestles with God. We see the prophet Jeremiah. He wrestles with God. Job was wrestling verbally with his friends and verbally in prayer with God. And he's changed by the end of the book of Job. Jacob wrestled with God. We know what happened to him. Knocked his hip out of socket, didn't it? Psalm 37 invites us to this dynamic, living relationship with the Lord, where we are invited to ask these hard questions that come our way every single day. And God is big enough to handle our questions. Bobby said that last week, and I love that. So I want to reiterate that. God is big enough to handle whatever questions we bring God's way. I'm so thankful for that. Be awestruck in the presence of the Lord and wrestle with hopeful expectancy for him. This is an invitation. Psalm 37, 1 through 8 is an invitation to a different way of living. So I want to conclude with some practical ways that we can trust, delight, and rest, and be still, and so on. So some practical things that I think we can try even this week, even if you just pick one of these. We can begin our day with a prayer of surrender. Okay, well, how do I do that? Hey, take Psalm 37 if you want to. Turn it into a prayer. It's really fun to pray scripture, especially if you don't even know how to pray. Take a passage and turn it into a prayer. So we could pray Psalm 37. Lord, help me not to live this way. Help me not to live in this anger. Help me to live the way that you've called me to live. Lord, help me to trust in you. Show me areas in my life where I'm not trusting in you. Lord, show me areas that I've not committed to you. Lord, I want to delight in you. I want to be like that little baby at the beach, laughing in the arms of her father. Show me what that means. I've never experienced that. Does that make sense? See how you can take this and turn it into a prayer. Start every day like that. You can do that before you get out of bed. It doesn't have to be 8 verses long. It could be a few sentences. You haven't even gotten out of bed yet. Help me, Jesus. Okay, that's my go-to prayer. I'm telling you, it's true. Someone comes in my office and they're just in a tizzy, or one of my children is in a tizzy. Help me, Jesus. I don't say it out loud. I say it inside. But we can start our day with those prayers of surrender. We can offer up prayers of surrender throughout the day. When the telephone rings, when someone knocks on our door, when we have to deal with somebody at work, a difficult conversation, or we need to talk to our children. Lord, speak through me. Give me wisdom. Give me the words. Help me to understand them. We can be praying prayers like that throughout the day. That dawned on me one time. I never knew. Pray continuously. You know, Paul teaches that. We can. We can take everything that's happening constantly and turn it into a prayer. We can practice the spiritual disciplines. Richard Foster wrote a book called Celebration of Discipline. And I won't read all of these to you, but each chapter is a different discipline that we can practice to help us grow in our relationship with the Lord. There's a chapter on prayer, Bible study, simplicity, service, and celebration, which is what we're doing in here when we worship. We're celebrating who God is and what God has done for us. So read books like that. Practice some of those disciplines. You can start by reading your Bible for 5 minutes each day. You might grow to 10. And then you might even challenge yourself. Hey, I'm going to turn that into 30 minutes. I did that one summer. I challenged myself to have a disciplined time with the Lord every single morning. Transformed me. I was walking around the house happy. I was living here all the time, doing laundry, and I was happy. Challenge yourself with that. So begin each day with a prayer of surrender. Offer up prayers of surrender throughout the day. Practice some of the spiritual disciplines. And then finally, stay together with each other in community. This is so essential, what we're doing here today. We need to look each other in the eye. We need to sing together and look at each other and affirm our faith and encourage each other. Even if we don't sit down and speak one-on-one, just looking at each other and seeing you here worshiping, it's encouraging. Gets even better if we can sit down and speak face to face and one-on-one. So this is how I want to challenge you, and so I ask you, will you join me this week? Let's walk out of this old way of living down here that the psalmist is really calling us out of. Let's walk in the fullness of the Spirit. Let's walk through change, through college, through school, which is right around the corner, through our marriage, through all of our relationships, living out Psalm 37. We are invited to a different way of living. Amen.